Tara Sweeney is Executive Vice President of the Arctic Slope Regional Corporation and is also Chair of the Arctic Economic Council. She joins us to discuss Arctic economic development. Tara, thanks for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you.
Let me first begin, before we dive into the issue, just ask you about the conference you're attending, about the forum that you were participating in this day-long event at the Wilson Center.
I was moderating a panel on the opportunities for and barriers to Arctic economic development.
And the whole day is looking at the big picture of the Arctic as an emerging zone of interest for economic development. And so you mentioned these two big words, opportunities and barriers. Let's start with the more positive one, sure. The opportunities. What are the opportunities that are presenting themselves in the Arctic?
Well, you look at the economic potential of the Arctic and the global focus in this area of the world, and there are significant opportunities which include capacity building for our communities, certainly infrastructure development as we see an increase in marine transportation from either the Nordic Arctic through the Bering Straits of Alaska. And in that increased activity, there are opportunities for business development.
And, Americans are often surprised to find out that they live in an Arctic nation, not when from your state, not in Alaska. They're pretty obvious. So what about the barriers? I mean, an obvious thing that often comes to mind is environmental concerns. But what are some of the barriers to fully exploiting the opportunities in the Arctic?
Uncertain regulatory environment, I would say, rises to the top amongst the discussions that I've participated in throughout the Arctic, and having a certain regulatory environment it provides that stability so that we can attract investment to the Arctic.
That's going to take a lot of cooperation among a group of nations. How likely are you to get the kind of clarity that you're searching for?
Well, there are initiatives underway right now to take a look at the various regulatory structures throughout the Arctic and doing a country-by-country analysis or region-by-region analysis, looking at the Russian Arctic, the North American Arctic, and the Nordic Arctic. And so that cooperation is taking place right now.
And is it a very high level of cooperation? I mean, you mentioned Russia. When you look at other world events, particularly Ukraine, cooperation with Russia is not something that the West is enjoying right now. Is it different in the Arctic?
Absolutely. We have members from Russia as part of the Arctic Economic Council, as part of our governance committee and our executive committee. And the Arctic is a place for peace. And I feel it's important to underscore that because Arctic residents are peaceful people. And the cooperation between all Arctic states or Arctic nations you can see it inside the Arctic Economic Council.
Can that continue, do you think, when more and more attention is focused on the region?
It's our job.
You have to make it
Yes.
work.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of that, about awareness of the Arctic as a place that relates to these vast opportunities that you describe, if we were going to look at three groups, governments, the business sector, the private sector, and citizens, what's the relative level of awareness among each of those groups about the Arctic and the opportunities?
In each country, or
just generally speaking? I'm guessing that governments are pretty engaged.
Yes.
What about the business sector? Is this an area of increased interest?
Oh, absolutely. There's tremendous interest in the Arctic and pan-Arctic collaboration and cooperation and partnership, especially Arctic business-to-business opportunities, and for industries outside of the Arctic or point south, there is a growing interest in the business community.
And what about among citizens, as issues might emerge and opportunities might emerge and decisions might emerge? Are people up to speed? Is this an area that generally the population is focused on?
In the Arctic or outside?
Outside the Arctic.
I would say that there is a need for education of the general population. When you look at the United States, for example, many people don't recognize that they live in an Arctic nation. But Alaska is what makes the United States an Arctic nation. And what happens in the Arctic doesn't necessarily stay in the Arctic. And so people,
It's not Las Vegas.
people need to engage in the discussion.
So based on this education effort, what is it that people need to know? What don't they know about the Arctic that they need to know about?
Well, a number of things. First, people live there. There are about 4 million people throughout the circumpolar region, and that's a large population.
Not just polar bears and ice floes.
It is not just polar bears and ice floes, and that in the Arctic, we are the best stewards of our own environment because it defines who we are as people. It puts food on the table for our residents who depend on the land and the sea to feed and nourish us. And so as we look at economic development opportunities in the Arctic, there is an appropriate balance to development and stewardship. It is not a situation where we have to choose between the two. And our people have been living in this area for thousands of years, and we've figured it out. However, there's no denying that climate change is certainly occurring. And as Indigenous people in the Arctic, we are extremely resilient, and the only constant that we've known is change. And so this is a time of climate change, and so too must we adapt.
And are the native populations engaged actively in this whole process?
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
A final thought is about trend lines versus headlines. You don't find headlines now about the Arctic unless maybe you are talking about climate change. When will that change? What do the trend lines indicate? When will we see the Arctic emerging as an area that is gathering more and more attention?
Well, I believe that we're trending now, and more and more individuals are becoming engaged in that discussion. And when we can effectively cooperate, collaborate, or form those pan-Arctic partnerships that deliver real results, either in the United States or elsewhere, then you will see more of the headlines versus just trending.
Well, thanks for giving us a preview of that future. Tara Sweeney, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.